Hi, welcome to Salt of the Earth. I'm Veruschka Normandeau. I'm a healing arts coach, and today I am welcoming the wonderful Thea Wirsching, which actually I didn't even check how she pronounces. But I met this lovely woman on a Facebook group, and she caught my attention by really being capable to express the shadow side and how the shadow side speaks out. And it was just so resonant with me that I looked at her profile and saw she was an evolutionary astrologer, and I'm such an addict of following astrologers and listen to all the versions and their interpretations and translations, and found that she was offering a session called the Food Tour, and that really surprised me, and so I made contact. And now, after several months and after receiving 2 incredibly thorough readings with news that I hadn't uncovered in my years of doing my own research and getting my own readings, I just felt like completely seen, like an X-ray vision. Like, are you sure you're not psychic? So here is a very multi-passionate, multi-talented being that I'm so grateful to share with you today. And so welcome, Thea. I would love for you to introduce yourself and also share what kind of titles or labels that you're translating yourself through into the world these days.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Veruschka. I'm so honored to be here. And you know what? I actually pronounce it Thea. We probably should have checked that, but I figure if men can be Theo, I can be Thea, which means goddess. So that is the name I practice under, Thea Wirsching. I'm an evolutionary astrologer, and I have been focusing recently on the planet Ceres and its connection to food in the natal chart. So let's see. And I also have a tarot deck based on American Renaissance literature. So that's kind of my other hat that I wear. And that's me. What else do you want to know?
Well, actually, I thought it was Thea. I think it was a mishearing. I thought you said, no, I say Tia, and I was like, okay. So Thea, that's awesome. Well, you are also a scholar, and are you not also just trained with as a Waldorf school teacher?
So, you know what, I have been kind of casting around for what I'm going to be doing with my life. You know, I should probably have had it figured out by now, but I left academia to raise my young son, and I thought Waldorf education might be a good fit for me, but I've decided not to go back to the education program this year and just really focus on my astrology business. And, you know, I think this has a lot to do with trauma. I've been thinking about this, like my path through life. And when you've undergone traumatic circumstances, oftentimes it can be difficult to really just go for the thing that you want. You have this kind of over-identification with the false self. And so you want to do something that's socially approved. And so I've had a real hang up with astrology and shame, even though this has been my passion for at least 20 years now. It's always been like a secret thing that I do. And so really coming out as an astrologer is a big deal for me.
Wow, that's amazing. I totally understand the part where you're wanting to do things in a more socially acceptable way, mainstream way, and that duality within you. And then, you know, only through living life do you get to the point where, wait a minute, it's kind of okay to be into what I love and to totally unabashedly share this and find this out into the world. So how did astrology first show up in your life? I know that you have come from a colorful family, bohemian mother, an artist mother. Was it always in your life?
I feel like it was always in my life because my mother was a sculptor. Well, she doesn't do it anymore. She's still alive, but she doesn't sculpt anymore. But she created these zodiac trivets. And so there were suns all over our house with the names of the zodiac signs on them. So I feel like there was a lot of the ephemera of the occult around. So she would use tarot cards in her art classes for her students to get inspiration from. So I just grew up with a lot of the stuff, and she had an Egyptian themed bathroom. So she's just a pack rat. So she had all this like images of Egyptian gods in our bathroom. So I got into it as a teenager, and then I was kicked out of my first year of college, and I wanted to have a vision quest and just really figure out like, well, what do I want to do if it's not college? And on my vision quest at age 19, that was what came up, like astrology. And I thought it was so embarrassing. And I was like, this can't be it. This can't be the thing that I want to do. But I went and got a teacher at that time, and Karen McCauley, now of Kepler College. So that it's just been interesting how it's evolved. But even though I ultimately went back to school, I kept dropping out of school to study astrology. That's been a strong theme in my life. It's happened multiple times.
And do you feel like you're done with studying it?
Oh, that's such a good question. There's always so much more to learn. So my movement now is less toward formal study, and I am relying more on my intuition. And that's also a big jump for me, because what I initially liked about astrology was that it was so certain, because the chart will never change. Your natal chart is always going to be your natal chart, even if you draw the house system differently. It's still the same basic information. And so that gave me a kind of security, like, oh, this isn't just a make it up as you go along, new age BS kind of thing. But now when I read a chart, I feel like I incorporate a lot of shamanic tracking, and that has to do with my intuition. So it feels sort of like I'm flipping a channel, like, is it this, is it this, is it this? And then I'll find the track of someone's energy. And that's how the Ceres material came to me. It was very intuited, because I feel like we just don't have that great book on Ceres out there that can make it relevant for every person's chart. And I hope to write that book. I hope that's me that can put that book out there.
Oh, that would be amazing. Yes, I think she's only been coming on my radar the last 3 years, but it's just an interesting way that she's always coming up,
Yeah.
Well, how much do you follow astrology to translate like your daily rhythm?
Oh, that's a great question. So I have a confession in that I don't really use it. I don't use it habitually day to day, I'll say. Like if I'm having a really crap day, I'll go and look at the stars and say, okay, what is happening right now? Or if I have something I want to plan, like this interview between us, I was kind of looking ahead to what would put me in my best light. So that's an electional way of using astrology. But my focus tends to be the outer planets, and they move so slowly. So I'm not needing to check on what they're doing all the time. And you can get a lot of insight from Venus or the moon or Mars as to why you're having a crap day. But the thing is, a crap day is over within the week, right? You've resolved it. And so my work tends to focus more on like these big, heavy patterns that might move in, like kind of an existential issue that you have to grapple with. So I would say I probably use it less in the day-to-day than most astrologers.
Wow, I am having like a field of questions popping up all around this, because it
Cool.
just a big topic. So how do you feel like people really benefit, why they should get an astrology reading? Let's just start there. Why do you feel in your heart of hearts like how it would improve their lives? Like top 3 reasons.
I love that question. And I just want to make an aside first and say that, how I came to this work, it was very compulsive. Like I never had some idea of people need this. I just felt like bound, like, talk to you, ask you about this, and it's a way for me. But let's see if I can do a top 3. I feel like people really need to be put in touch with their intuition. And so the most common experience I have doing a chart for someone, the client will tell me, I've been entertaining those ideas on the outskirts of my consciousness, or I've always had a secret dream of opening a bakery, or whatever it is. It might be something they pine for, they long for, but they feel like they can't have it or it's not accessible. And so to have someone who's never met them before say, oh, what about this dream? They feel very affirmed and are able to have the confidence to move forward. And then the flip side of that is, if I mention something like, oh, this looks like a long-standing issue, issues with partnership looks difficult, trust looks difficult, then they feel equally affirmed in, okay, there's a reason that I have this struggle. There's not something wrong with me. I'm not bad at relationships. There's some karmic evolutionary purpose to working out relationship issues, which could in turn give someone the courage to go out there and try again and try to master the issues and have sort of a roadmap of where they're heading. And I'm supposed to come up with a number 3.
Entertainment.
What was that?
Entertainment.
Yeah, I don't really use it that way. It is entertaining, but mostly my elevator speech with astrology is, it's validating, and it's confidence building. So yeah, but I mean, you've received readings from me. You can volunteer something, but that tends to be how I think of it. And I could probably do some work in getting more in touch with what people get out of it. I think that's my work to do. It's really claiming this in a big way.
Yeah. Well, I would like to hear about how you made the connection with Ceres and realized that this was food and nourishment related. I love that I found it during a time where I was offering one of my programs called Mission Possible, where you really lay out all the different areas of your life in relationship to food, body image, cravings, addictions, and all those different things for everyone to really examine and look at. And it just, like, when I saw that's such a missing piece, to just see organically, what we are drawn to or how we are maybe made. And that seems kind of far off that you would find that in the stars, your unique body needs. So I'd love to hear how you came to that.
Okay, great. So I lived in Eugene, Oregon for a number of years, and the astrologer Demetra George lives there, and she's written about these asteroids. So she has a book called Asteroid Goddesses and Finding Our Way Through the Dark. So she was a big hero of mine, and we became friendly. And I feel like I often pick up knowledge psychically from people. Like, if I just sort of hang around someone, I feel like a lot of information comes into my field. And so I think that's when the Ceres question first got prompted for me. And a lot of it has just unfolded intuitively over the last year. And I think it's significant that there was a NASA mission to Ceres. So synchronistically, there's something to that, right? Like, why are we all thinking about Ceres right now? And if you look at our world, the state of farming and the state of food production, it's pretty alarming. The way that we eat, the way that we create so much trash for every meal, the way we often eat in isolation, the way we experience no gratitude for the food that we have, this epic abundance that we have, which has never happened in human history before, prior to the last 100 years. And you see all these people trying diets like, why are people going gluten-free? When wheat has been a staple food for thousands of years. So what is going on? Are crops poisoned? So I think there's just a lot of tension and turmoil and disruption in the whole arena of food. And that's been on my mind because I've had allergies, I've had my own struggles with eating disorders, and coming from a family that was completely disordered about food. And I think as a woman, we know, like, every woman I know seems to be completely fucked up about food. having some anxiety about what she's putting into her mouth and how that affects her weight. And that's another area of mine that I've worked on a lot, like having run a lot of women's groups around body image. So Ceres kind of really naturally fits into that. And so I thought of her as the true ruler of Virgo. That's my contention, because I'm a Virgo. If you know Virgos, we're edgy, we're a little bit sharp. And I just found that I was never looking to Mercury in the chart to answer Virgo questions, or to answer sixth house questions. And I feel like Virgo in the sixth house, sorry if I'm getting too technical, but I'll try to explain it. The sixth house is the house of daily routines. And I feel like in astrology, it's kind of like, blah, how boring, daily routine. And so it just really felt like that area, like a redemption needs to happen. And it's so cool that there's this goddess Ceres, who's not only a grain goddess, so that tells us she's in charge of food, but Ceres, as the Greek goddess Demeter, was the deity associated with the coolest mystery cult of all time, the Eleusinian mysteries. So I think there's a lot in the sixth house, which instead of like daily routines, like blah, work out, eat healthy, meditate, if we can kind of transform that idea to daily ritual, we can really get something out of Ceres. And if we can turn food into a ritual and into a way of connecting with the earth, so that's what makes sense to me, right? Like, what should our ideal relationship to food be? I feel like historically it's always been about gratitude and connecting to the earth. And we've just completely lost that because we have no idea where our food comes from. Most of us don't grow it ourselves in the West. So that's a lot. You can tell me where.
Oh, no. I mean, you're right on track. You're right.
Cool.
Are you complete on that?
I feel like that's a lot of information. Yeah. I can always say more. I can talk endlessly about this topic. So I'm stopping myself.
Okay. Well, I was very validated, and it was really insightful to get this reading. So I personally highly recommend it. And I just think it's a really unique window. And also, the way that you are, your intuition and your questions are very intuitive too. So are you reading this out of the chart? Are you psychic? You have a lot of wisdom to share, and you're able to express it so beautifully.
Thank you.
So I would like to also hear about you moving to your business into the Pluto Babe arena, which I, fall right into. Would you like to talk about what inspired that and where?
Sure. Sure, I would love to do that. So I did my astrological training with Stephen Forrest, who's wonderful. That really transformed my life, getting into training with him. But I found, doing those trainings that I was the one wearing all black, or maybe I'd be the one talking about suicide or asking like the really edgy, thorny morality questions that can't be easily answered. So I don't know why it seems relevant though. I had a client who was asking me whether she should go into porn, whether that would be a good choice for her. And while that's certainly not my choice, while it's not something I'm not sure if I approve of, or I might have some feminist, reservations about, looking at her chart, I was like, yeah, like this is the thing that was going to be a really empowering thing for you. And she's done it so beautifully, just really uplifting women, I feel like, in the way that she's done it. But I feel like I kind of attract those types of experiences, right? That's a great example of a morally gray area. Like, what do you say to someone who's asking you that question? And I've lived through so many of those morally ambiguous situations in my own life, like having criminals in my own family. So do you love them because they're family members? Or do you revile them because they're criminals? And those are really Pluto Scorpio questions. So I just found myself talking about those things a lot in class. And I asked a woman in the class with me, am I being too heavy? Am I being too dark? And she was like, you're just a Pluto babe. Like, that's just who you are. You're just a Pluto babe. Like, you're doing it. You are who you are. And I felt so validated when she said that. And this was a decade ago, I think. And I didn't realize how much that phrase had crept into my language. But another astrologer in this Facebook group we're in pointed out to me, like, you kind of are the Pluto babe. Like, you are this person. You carry a lot of this darkness and the shadow as a healing tool. And it's pretty marketable. And I resisted at first, but I just had this feeling. I feel like the people who find me, such as yourself, have Pluto in a pretty significant place in the chart, and oftentimes are dealing with lots of trauma or lots of things that are difficult to talk about in mainstream culture. And I'm totally comfortable with those things. I have an 8th house moon. I have Pluto conjunct 3 personal planets in the 5th house, trine Jupiter. I have North Node in Scorpio, conjunct Uranus. Like, I'm ready to go on all that dark and difficult stuff.
Well, don't you feel like the time that has passed that you are seasoned in such a way where you see like all the shadow side and all the darkness you've been through is now almost your selling point, that people trust you because they've known you've been in the depths of things? How are you experiencing this post eclipse kind of being in your own bones?
What was the last part? Being
In
with
your
the
own
bones?
Yeah.
In my own bones. Well, it's interesting. I did kind of a freakish thing under Mercury retrograde, which I applied for a professor job, and I had just had some energy work done. And my friend was like, "You did this amazing project on occultism in academia, and it's kind of like floating outside your body. You haven't claimed it." And I had so much pain about really owning it because I felt like it had been rejected. And that's a common experience of the Pluto babe, when you're bringing something that's shadowy and controversial and really makes people look at themselves. And I think that project in academia was really looking at what is reality, like what is knowledge. So of course it's going to make academics uncomfortable. But she was like, let's just work on you reclaiming this energy. So I took this big piece of energy back into my body. And then the very next thing I did was go out into the world and want some recognition for it with this college job, and I haven't applied to anything like that in 4 years. It had been a really long time. So I got the rejection letter this week. And, it's interesting. I tend not to believe in like signs as much as I used to. And I think we've talked about this. So I used to really just like wait for a sign and wait for permission to do something. And now I feel like, well, maybe I just have a really weak Mars. And I do. I have a very weak Mars. Because people who have a strong Mars are really fiery. They don't wait for permission. They just go out and create. They just go out and do things. So I don't want to say getting the rejection letter was a sign that I meant to just be an astrologer, but it did feel like I got a lot of clarity. Like I was very relieved. Like, okay, I don't have to go do some normal thing or try to fit into a normal box. I can just really run with this Pluto babe thing because that's what's presenting to me right now.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, there's a lot obviously also to ask on Mercury retrograde, but like on a side note, I was wondering, talking about signs, I walked by a tattoo parlor called Sacred Rose Tattoo, and so I was like, is this a sign? I don't really want a tattoo, but is this a sign? And then everything about it has been really wishy-washy and slow moving, and with the artist, and
right.
I can kind of take it or leave it, but then I'm like, is it even a good idea? Isn't that like a sacred contract, getting a tattoo during Mercury in retrograde? Is that a bad idea?
Yeah. You know what? I started the tattoo under Mercury retrograde and it took forever. And there were just like layers and layers of color. And it's not that anything went wrong. It was like we just had to keep going over the same point again and again and again, like a layered painting. So my arm was just exhausted. I think with signs, what I've learned is just to really trust my gut, to trust my emotions. And so if it's just an intellectual thing, it can be kind of a cool coincidence. Mm-hmm. But if I'm really emotionally invested, then I feel like I have to look at that and pay attention to that sign. So just like with interpreting dreams, there might be an interpretation in a dream book, but it's more important that you access your gut and your intuition, and what does that symbol really say to you? How does it make you feel?
Yeah, right. It is, and
Yes.
it's a big responsibility for people to really own and claim their own decisions, right? What you're talking about.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I feel like that's kind of the bane of my existence as an astrologer, because so often people want to avoid choice by going to a practitioner like me. And that is the last thing I want to do. And it's because I've had my choice taken away from me by so many practitioners. I was in kind of a cultish therapy group for years and years, 7 years of my life. And all of our decisions were like mandated by the therapist. She dictated what we would do, and she would tell us what was good for us. And so we weren't able to access our intuition. And if I argued with her, she would say, I'm the trained professional. Like, I know what's best for you. So that's something, it's very hard to do, because people are so hungry to have some guidance. But I really push people to follow their own guidance. You know, I try to ask really good questions, like sort of point them in the direction that's good for them. But ultimately, if you do something because an astrologer told you to do it, how much personal meaning does it have for you, versus if you really sat with the difficult feelings and pushed through all the ambiguity and came to the conclusion yourself? It's a lot more powerful.
Right, right. And then that's empowering, right?
Yeah.
So then you will have done your job to empower, right?
Exactly.
I think
Exactly.
questions are powerful. So the symbols, seeing symbols and intuition, that brings me to Roger Moore.
Oh, okay.
Roger Moore was probably my first ever crush, like when I was 5 years old.
Interesting.
So Live and Let Die. Would you like to tell journey?
Would I like to what?
Tell the
I didn't hear you.
story of Live and Let Die and what happened in that movie.
You know what? I don't know that I remember, but this is the one that has the voodoo in it, right? In New Orleans, right?
Maybe it contains the tarot.
Yeah. I think it's the occult James Bond. So my parents were obsessed with these movies, so I wound up watching a ton of them growing up. But I remember the voodoo funeral, and I think it's in that one as well. And then the tarot scene was cool, but because my parents were such James Bond geeks, my mom had that Tarot of the Witches tarot deck. So that's the one I grew up on, and that's what they use in the film. So I did use an image from that film on my website to talk about my story with tarot, but my story with tarot is pretty different in that I kind of rejected tarot when I was an astrologer, because I felt like when I first got into astrology, it was like, well, this is solid and secure. This is never going to change. And a tarot deck, you can just draw the cards differently each time. How is that helpful? Like, this isn't a solid occult tool. And then what I did, I wanted to learn tarot. So I took a deck and I had these tiny little clothespins, and I hung up the entire deck on a wall of my bedroom. So I was constantly looking at it, and I advise this to people a lot, to just use an image of something that you want to add to your life. And you don't even have to sit and meditate on it. It's just like having that image up subconsciously, you're going to start to chew on it and work on it. Mm-hmm. And then it was a very strange turn of events. But within a year of doing that, I was on a tour of Egypt with Mary Greer, like a tarot intensive tour of Egypt. And again, it was just hanging out with people who did tarot. I felt like I just got like all this information that I didn't have to study. I mean, I did use books, but it was more just like seeing people in their element, people who really knew what they were doing. And the tarot artist, Julie Cuccia Watts, was on that tour, and she's done some beautiful decks having to do with she made a deck about her trip called the Journey into Egypt Tarot. So it was very cool to then get that deck after being on that trip with her. So, and then the way that my tarot deck came about, you know, I had finished school and I had done all this epic work on the occult history of America. And I was reading the filmmaker Jodorowsky's book on tarot. So he has an amazing film called Holy Mountain. Have you seen that one?
No. Mm-mm.
Oh, you should check it out. So it's really big on visual display, and there's a tarot section and there's an astrology section and a shamanic section. I mean, it's such a big film. And he's been a 50-year student of the tarot. And so reading his book on tarot, I was reading about the priestess, and I just had this image of Emily Dickinson. And over the next 3 mornings, I just felt like it was a big gift. Like I got a big gift of how the American writers I'd spent so much time with could work as tarot archetypes. And that deck just, it feels so personal to me, because growing up I was so isolated and so miserable. And it was really reading books that let me know that there was a much bigger world out there that I could access. So I feel like literature has always been my therapy. And that was the big mistake I made going to graduate school in literature. It was like, oh, this is just my coping mechanism. This is not actually what I want to do with my life. This is just how I can feel sane, is by constantly hanging out with books.
Well, this the American Renaissance Tarot, how can people follow it right now?
Well, we have a website, theamericanrenaissancetarot.com. Maybe there's no the. I think it's just American Renaissance Tarot. I don't remember, but you can find it. We did have an Indiegogo going for a while. We're accepting private commissions if people are interested in commissioning a card, and we have a Facebook page, which I'm going to be blogging on a little bit more once my son starts preschool in a couple weeks. I'll have a lot more time, so it's going to open up a lot for me in this career path.
Well, I'm really excited about it. The art is beautiful as well.
Thank you.
It's such an amazing angle, an interesting angle, and something, being birthed from our country in this time. It's such a compelling combination,
It's funny because I came into all the ideas of it in 2013 when Obama was president, and a lot of the thrust of the deck is about telling some of the stories of the Civil War and abolition. And as I was putting all this together, I was like, do we really need this? Has our country become post-racist? It's such a dumb, naive question in retrospect. And then after Trump was elected, I'm just stunned. I mean, I'm still kind of bowled over by what's appeared, by what's been approved of and allowed to appear in our country. And so that's definitely given me a lot of fire, like, oh, this is really necessary, getting these stories out there about Black writers and abolitionists and what this experience actually was, the fight to end slavery, not just our kind of like glossed over movie version of it.
Right. So do you feel like you have a mission in your life right now, like your heart's mission?
Oh, that's such a good question. I feel like I'm approaching it, but that feels like such a point of vulnerability to me, and I think that it's another thing with Pluto. I'm so identified with Pluto, and Pluto's very cynical. It's like really tuned into the dark and what can go wrong and the fly in the ointment. And so I think the ultimate Pluto healing point is to say I do have a mission in the world, and the mission is bigger than me. It's transpersonal. And that feels like such a hard thing for me to claim. So I feel like that's just like the last little bits of my intellectual attempts to control everything, to really claim like my astrology practice is my mission in the world. And I feel like the tarot gets at that a little bit more, because I feel like knowing about history has been so healing for me. So just to give an example, in a college class when I was 18, one that I actually showed up for, was a religion class, and the professor had a goddess worshiper come talk to us. And even though I'd been kind of like Wiccan up to that point, I'd never heard anyone express things just the way that she expressed it. And she just told the story of Genesis from a woman's perspective and how silly it sounds. Like, oh, so life came from Adam's rib. And she would just sort of pause and let that sink in. And then she started talking about women and our status as creators and how we can create life, and just kind of reflecting back on thousands of years of human history. And it was so profound for me to really feel like, oh, this moment of patriarchy is not how it's always been, and to really have all that access to the past. So I love going back and looking at cultures in American history, just so that we know things weren't always how they are now, or it's not always like the story we've been telling. So
yeah, and it really, I mean, now with fake news and all of these things, I think it's just people's minds are just being blown and are opening in ways willingly or unwillingly. But to really say, who knows what is true? Who wrote these stories? Is it her story or his story? And
right,
like you just like literally are breaking it down and getting things like, oh, well, of course you can't rely on just because that made it and that survived, and how can we know this is fact? And to really have that humbling, not like betrayal or being fooled, but like a humbling, like, well, we just chose to believe this, but who really knows from what perspective,
Yes, absolutely. I'm so feeling you on what you're saying. And I mean, it's just interesting with the recent flare up in violence in Charlottesville, and it's over a statue of Robert E. Lee. And Robert E. Lee, in his lifetime, said, "Don't make a statue of me."
Yeah.
I was on the losing side. Like, let's heal, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why I find it so important to look to the source instead of our contemporary sound bites.
Yeah, I also would love for you, for the people that are a bit foreign to astrology, to give a little profile on Pluto. What Pluto stands for,
Yeah. So Pluto for me is the point of wounding in the chart. And because Pluto moves so slowly, oftentimes there can be kind of like a cultural wounding, like something we're going through culturally. So Pluto in Virgo, which is you, right? Your generation. Pluto in Virgo has a lot to do, I feel like, with environmental destruction. So it's been a strong theme of a lot of people who have Pluto in Virgo. Like they're recognizing, whoa, like what's going on. So, but basically, when we're talking about trauma, oftentimes that's a point that's really stuck and it's really crystallized. It's not something you might be able to see. So if you're new to astrology and you're exploring on astro.com and you're looking at your Pluto, you might think, oh, well, I don't have a pain there. I don't have a wound there. That's functioning just fine. But oftentimes we don't realize how much pain is there. We've just learned to cope or to dissociate. Okay, so that's a lot of times what we do with trauma. And then when that planet gets hit by transit or progression, then suddenly all that trauma might be released. There might be a lot of pain and a lot of vulnerability, and the thawing out of what you weren't able to do, what you weren't able to face as a younger person, right? So it's not warm and fuzzy. It's kind of hard to talk about. But I feel like once you deal with all that trauma, then you become the Pluto Babe. So that's the point that I'm selling or marketing. And you become shameless, and I'll use the example in my own life of having been the victim of sexual abuse and rape. For so many years, it seemed impossible to talk about those things. And that's really how to get at the Pluto shame, is like once you start saying them, it actually breaks the spell of the shame, right? Because you've been the recipient of something bad, and so you feel like you have to hold it and contain it. But when you talk about it and break these spells, it's so liberating. It's been incredibly liberating for me to do that. And I think what's interesting about Pluto, it's also associated with magic and chthonic wisdom, this kind of like underworld, like shadow, like underground wisdom. And that's edgy. Like, people are a little frightened of that. And so in the writing I've been doing for my coming out as Pluto Babe, I'm looking at how when you've healed things that are epic traumas, it's not often easy for people to understand that. You know, um, they might reject you because a lot of people are walking around feeling victimized. You know, like, oh, this bad thing happened to me and I'm going to complain about it. And that's not really a Pluto stance. It's more like a Neptune stance. Like, oh, poor me, I've been slayed by all the cruelty out there. And when you can say to that person, like, actually, you can have a wonderful life. You can face that pain. You can pick yourself up and move forward. They might not like hearing that, you know? So there's some really, Pluto's about power. It's about marshaling the deepest power that we have, which is facing the shadow and integrating it. It really can fire you through some epic leaps forward, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, I mean, all the planets have such a different, you know, role in catharsis, and I think it is very smallly understood, you know, death,
Interesting.
transformation, you know, different things that they symbolize for people. But
well, people are scared of it, understandably, but I guess that would be, you know, point number 3. If is we were asking, like, you know, what 3 reasons should someone go see an astrologer for? I feel like I want to make people just love their chart and to love these planets as benevolent deities. And so you'll often hear people say, like, oh my God, I'm having a Pluto transit, everything's gonna suck. You know, and I've lived through lots of Pluto transits, and what wound up happening is that I became a stronger and much more powerful person. So, for example, when Pluto was transiting my 6th house of health, that's when I first learned how to exercise and take care of my body, which for a, you know, woman who was like in so much turmoil of like, oh, I'm fat and I'm disgusting, and just to sort of realize, like, oh, I have the control here, like I can become powerful. So Pluto affects transformations. I mean, that was a transformation in the way that I lived in my body. And so I think it's much more helpful to look at these planets as, like, not what are they trying to do to me? Like, why are they trying to make me suffer and put me through hell? I feel like there's always a benevolent design or purpose behind what's happening. And so if you're undergoing a Pluto transit and you are in hell and you are looking at a lot of old stuck trauma, know that that is all to a purpose. That's a means to an end to get you to liberate all that energy that's hidden and stuck underground so that you can use it to do something really powerful and transpersonal in your life.
mm-hmm. I mean, this is, you know, an interview I'd like to have in itself about speaking, dealing with shadow things, but yet I'd like to ask you, someone who suffers from PTSD and has suffered from it, what's some advice you would give others, and what you are using yourself to get you through some trauma?
Ooh, that's tough. I think it's tough just because I'm so unusual in this. And so I'll tell you a little bit about my story, but there's reasons I don't think how I handle it works for everyone. So, for example, like, I won't take antidepressants. That just doesn't work for me. I don't like being checked out. I like being really, really conscious, and whatever the demon is, I want to see it. I want to wrestle with it and accepting the fact that so much violence, I lived through so much trauma. And I started trying to kill myself when I was 11. So, I mean, I just really lived with this as a gestalt of, like, I want to die. Like, everything is so awful, I want to die. And it just became very comfortable for me. Like, it became a thing that I had to live with and manage. And I realized that I might not be able to move it. I might not be able to change it, but I could at least learn how to function with it. So that's a lot of the early work I did. Starting at age 15 and going into counseling, I just did a lot of cognitive work on, like, how do I keep the bad thoughts away? Like, just sort of looking at my brain and realizing, oh, like, my thoughts are making me feel like shit. So how do I stop my thoughts? And my husband says I'm like Spock from Star Wars. Like not Star Wars, sorry, Star Trek. I don't really watch those shows, so sorry. But I am able to kind of say like, here's a bad train of thought. Let's just nip that in the bud. So a lot of cognitive control. And when I had these repressed memories of sexual abuse come up later in life, I was shocked. I had no idea. And that those same strategies were not working for me. I didn't have I couldn't have cognitive control because the memories came from such a deep place, like body memories. Mm-hmm. So I would get triggered and like fall on the floor and huddle into a little ball. So I did some counseling, but I would say mostly I've been helped by shamanic work. And what I like about shamanic work is that it's not engaging the rational mind. Mm-hmm. And that's certainly where I want to take my own skills. So instead of astrology training, I'm looking at doing more shamanic training, because it's pretty beautiful when you have like an energetic pattern in your body, and some practitioner can come along and just make a little torque, and you don't have that problem anymore. They release that for you. Mm-hmm. So I guess what I really want to say to answer your question is that I don't think people should give up. I think that happens a lot where you encounter a problem like you're depressed or you have an eating disorder or you have a bad relationship pattern or something like that. And maybe you try one thing to heal it and it doesn't work. But I feel like my life has taught me you just can't give up. And I had been working on why do I live so closely with the idea of suicide? Why is that so comfortable for me? And then when the repressed memories of sexual abuse came out, it was like I had my answer. I was like, oh, okay, finally I'm getting to the root of it. I never knew why this stuff was here, but I had done so much work on myself up to that point that it was relatively easy to integrate that. I had developed so many tools just for dealing with it, even though I didn't know the cause of it. I didn't know the genesis. Mm-hmm. So I feel like even if you feel like a thing is stuck and is never going to move, just keep switching modalities. Mm-hmm. That's what I've done. And it takes everything, changing my relationship to my body. I had severe eating disorders. I had to be hospitalized for those. For bulimia and anorexia. I tried everything. I mean, I was like a feminist in women's groups, therapy, like meditation, everything. And then it was actually a drama therapy group that really constellated some patterns in the female line for me, which, I never would have thought of like this being an ancestor issue. Mm-hmm. But kind of going back up my mother's line, we all had eating disorders. And where does that come from? So you just don't know. Like, you just don't know what is going to be the modality that will shift something.
Mm-hmm. And what comes to mind as you were sharing is that most likely the memory surfaced when you were possibly the safest you could be to have that information revealed to you.
Yeah.
I mean, that you will have tried everything. I mean, it's like the path there, the journey there, to then being able to have some sort of tool belt to even weather that storm of awakening to that. Does that make sense? That in a sense,
yeah.
Was the perfect time? I mean, it's never a good time, right? But it's still the perfect time.
Yeah, I mean, to be totally candid with you, and I'm getting all Pluto Babe here, I'm just going to lay it out there. I wanted to have natural birth when I was pregnant, and I talked to my higher up Sekhmet, paid her a visit at the Goddess Temple of Orange County, where there's this huge statue of her, and she was kind of like, of course, like, what is your body made to do? So I was committed to having natural birth, but in that experience, the trauma was released. The trauma was in my body. It was buried so deeply in my body. So my experience of birth was actually an experience of like reliving horrific rape. I mean, and if that's not a Pluto situation, like, I don't know what is. I mean, that was just...
That's a little catch-22 right there, huh?
Just such an epic mindfuck to be dealing with, like, here's a new life. And here's me really, really wanting to be dead, you know, like feeling all those things at the same time. But because I had done so much personal work on myself, I had such a strong commitment to life for my child. And I thought it was interesting. I was like, well, if I was ever going to check out, you know, this memory really makes me want to check out. But here's this new life. And so that's what really kept me grounded and able to move through this without doing antidepressants, because I tried it. I was like, well, I don't want to feel this shit. So I went on some meds. And I mean, I think 3 weeks later, I was like, I don't want to be checked out for this first year of my kid's life. Mm-hmm. So, and that's an experience I'll probably write about, because it was so, like, psychedelic's the wrong word, but it was just very surreal in the way all this material came up for me.
Wow, that is definitely film material in a sense, and at the same time, like, the way that our lives are scripted, oftentimes it really is like it had to, like, the degree of your pain had to match the degree of life, right? That it
yeah, totally
had to balance each other out, right? Do you feel that?
I felt that way. I mean, this has been, you know, you can hear me getting choked up. This has been such an epic, deep struggle for me that it was only, you know, having my son that kept me alive through that. And, you know, but I do have kind of a story of triumph through that. In that when I actually started to look at these things, there was some joy. And I don't know if this has to do with me being a Virgo, but just like the fact that it made sense. It was like, oh, so I haven't been crazy all these years. Like, there was a thing that was like really polluting the waters of my psyche. And so just the logic of it was really satisfying for me. But then I also told myself at the time, I was like, I don't have to relive it. I don't have to get rewounded in order to heal. The worst stuff has already happened. So all I can do, what I can do now is just live a different life. And so just really coming out as myself, you know, being honest about who I am. I feel like that's the most important healing work I've done since these memories surfaced. It hasn't been crying about it or raging about it, because I'd already done all those things without knowing that's what I was doing, you know, before I even knew what the memory was. It's more just saying, like, I deserve to be seen. You know, visibility is a big deal for me. And I deserve to, that might be it. That might be it. Just, I deserve to be seen. That's a real tough one for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think a big thing is really getting to that point of you have inherent value, no matter, you know, how dark it's been.
Yeah.
And that there's nothing to prove. If we could get to that point to really know that there's nothing to prove, that we're lovable, you know, and
yeah,
when that, and I'm sure having your own child, you know, so much healing comes with that automatically. So you being a contradiction in itself around your scholarly side, and then the total magical priestess side, and you being always willing to throw caution to the wind for the magic, even with all of your right brainness as well. I'm curious what it's like as a priestess to hold space for raising a little male in this world.
Ooh. Well, he's pretty young, so a lot of those issues haven't come up yet, and we've tried to include him in ritual, but, you know, 2-year-old doesn't have the best focus, so I feel somewhat like, you know, I'm not there yet. I haven't had to have those talks with him yet, but I did feel when we found out we were having a boy, I felt this tremendous sense of relief, like it was going to be my husband's job to teach him how to be a good male. I mean, and I'll play my part, of course, but the best thing he can have is a really positive role model, I feel like. So.
Well, that's awesome. That you, so what do you think about if you had to give some advice to your youngest teenage self, from knowing what you know now, where you stand right now, what you'd like to have?
You got to give me a minute here.
Yeah.
I mean, it's strange. I feel like I already had some access to higher knowledge or my higher self, even at that age, because I didn't die. I didn't become a junkie. And so many therapists have said this to me, like, it's really weird that you didn't kill yourself, like when all this stuff was going on. And that's the thing that has made me believe in reincarnation, because I remember being 4 years old vividly and looking into a mirror and having this conversation with my eyes. You know, my eyes seemed like this timeless part of me. And it kind of went like, how the fuck did I get here? Like, I'm in the wrong place. Like, just kind of looking around, the people around me, like, this is not right. I don't belong here. And then being told by some psychologists, like, well, that's not a normal thing for a kid to think. You know, most kids really love their parents and worship their parents. And I just felt like there's something else. You know, there's a bigger mystery here, because this doesn't feel right. So just sort of seeing the ways that I had all this understanding that my parents lacked was a way for me to know that that this wasn't all there is. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like I did have some access to my higher self, even in the depths of all this crap that I was going through.
Mm-hmm. So there isn't any nugget of wisdom that you would shoot her way?
You know, it's interesting. I don't know what this says about me, but I talked to my psychology class when I was 16 because I had been hospitalized for a suicide attempt at age 15. And my teachers were really very involved in my life because I wasn't close to my parents. And so a lot of like teachers try and rescue me. But the teacher, Larry Bushner at Agora High, asked me, well, what could we have done? You know, what could I have done? We're so sorry this happened to you. And of course I had been completely masking it. I was like the type A overachiever. Is common for kids who've undergone trauma to overcompensate, you know. So I was just really obsessed with my work, and I said at the time, nothing, because this was my demon to slay. There's nothing anyone could have done because I was hell-bent on hurting myself. And until I really looked at that, no one could have convinced me or told me otherwise. I had to become open first. And it's interesting. I will always remember this moment. So when I was 15 and in the hospital, a social worker was talking to us, and she asked me to check in. And I said, well, you know, I'm not ready to go jump in front of a bus, but I just have no reason to live. And she looked at me and said, your reason to live right now is to find a reason to live. I mean, that phrase has stuck with me my entire life. If I could think of something that encapsulates the way that I approach astrology, it's not so much that the chart is going to like just answer all these questions for you, mm-hmm. or solve all these mysteries. It's like you have to actively go out and find that. Like if you have Venus in Libra conjunct Mars in your 9th house, like what can you go do with that? It's not like it's just going to be handed to you, right? Like you have to go on that quest and find it. So I was considering calling myself the existential astrologer because of that one moment, right? Like, yeah. Like what is your reason to live? Why don't you go find one? That's a reason to live. And it still is every day.
Mm-hmm. Well, I thank you so much for your vulnerability and the sharing of all of this. And I actually totally empathize with that absolute trust, because I've been stumped on that, wondering what I would tell them. And like, you know, you're not doing anything wrong.
Yeah.
In that sense. So I can totally relate to that. So in closing, our time has gone so fast.
Wow.
To hear about what do you find yourself telling others right now during this post-eclipse season? Like, what's your message for people or clients that are coming to you?
It's been a lot of grounding. Grounding has been a big issue that's come up with clients. I've incorporated some shamanic healing to just exercises to help people let go of things that they're ready to let go of. So I don't know if I can encapsulate it in a piece of advice, but I feel like I got a really clear picture of who I am during the eclipse and in the aftermath of the eclipse, and I feel like that's happening with clients as well, that just I'm getting kind of like a butterfly image. They're just ready to spread their wings and just give up whatever it is that's not allowing them to do that. So I would say just fly. Just jump in and fly. Thank you so much. It was just so liberating and cathartic to tell my story. I've never put all of that information in one place before, but it actually feels great to do it. And it feels like I'm just, breaking all those old shame spells. So thank you so much for this opportunity, Veruschka. I'm really touched.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a delight. And you just are, I just see you as just a deep well of just beautiful gifts and information. And I think because of your openness about the dark path that you've gone through, I trust you implicitly. And so, there is so much light in those who can be comfortable in the darkness. And so a lot of respect to you, and I'll be putting all your links and sites into the comments below. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Veruschka.
All right, have a beautiful day. Aloha.
Aloha.